Hey folks, welcome to this video that I do on life coaching. It's a special feature that I started about a month ago on the channel where subscribers or viewers or anybody really can email me questions or even leave them in the comments if they're not too sensitive, and I may get around to doing a video to answer some of the questions on them. And it's been productive, let's put it that way, because I'm a life coach, philosopher, I have a lot of experience in business and so forth. So anyway, that's sort of the place that I come from with these, but I don't reveal who asked me the different questions. I just I'll read the email that someone sends me or the comments. Sometimes I leave a detail or two out or alter it just a little bit just because it might be too on the nose or whatever, too sensitive information. But nonetheless, I'm going to read this email and then I'll just give my thoughts on it, and you can do what you want with it. Obviously, hopefully it will help more folks, sort of just give perspective on some things that might apply to your life, even though your details are a bit different. Okay, so here's the email, and then I'll go through and I'll just dissect it and after I've read it to you in its totality. Howdy. I want to say first that I've watched you for a while. Great reactions. Thank you. Secondly, I want to tell you my story and see what you have to say. I had a pretty rough childhood. I wasn't the most tame individual, you may say, and I always went against the grain. Dad was not a fan of that. Keep in mind, I turned out just fine, clean record, good guy, married, but even after 40 years on this earth, I still look back on some pretty tough times. My dad would do a very horrible thing to him. So I left that detail out. If I got out of hand, would chase me down the driveway or down the gravel road and beat me with my own bullwhip, made me run 20 laps up a hill that was probably a half-mile long. I ran away at age 13. The law found me 6 days later. Went back home, got some more beatings, ran off again and stole a truck to just get away. Well, that landed me in a juvenile detention facility, which kept me for a few years. Never a call or a letter from my family until I was going to be shipped out to a foster program. Then they suddenly showed up, took me home. Life goes on. We were getting along just fine, so I thought. I was 17 and I wanted a Ford Mustang I'd seen in town. It needed work, but worth the effort. So I bought it. Mom and Dad were in the house screaming at each other over it. Last conversation Dad and I ever had was him telling me, "Fuck you," and that was after he beat the shit out of me with a wood handle rake. Actually broke the handle over my back. I had tears in my eyes because it hurt, but I left because I knew I was of legal age to do so. I'm only telling you part of the story, but I've accomplished a lot in my life afterwards. I write songs now. I was a supervisor for 14 years at a sawmill. I've been to Spain, France, Belgium, have seen London, been to 48 states, but I've endured so much pain, and now I have seizures from head injuries. I forget things. I hold my parents accountable for what they did to me when I was younger. Toughened me up for sure, but didn't help me much in the long run of life. I appreciate your time. Well, yeah, that is absolutely not a normal story. I mean, so let's go back. You said that you always went against the grain and your father was not a fan of that. So fair enough. That part, just as that's written, is normal. What came after it was not. But I get it. Being a parent, you kind of hope your kid will turn out a little bit like you so you could relate to them and you could sort of see what motivates and sort of how to get them in line. But it doesn't work that way. You get what, parents, let's say they have two kids. Each child is generally very different than the other one. And so you develop a library of skills in the first one, but none of that applies or very little to the second one. But going against the grain is normal, but it's hard for people to adjust when you go against the grain. But it also depends on how against the grain you went. Like what sorts of things you were doing to go against the grain. Like if they were saying, your parents were saying, turn your music down when you're in your room, and you had an FU type attitude and cranked it way up, there was going to be friction there that like, wow, you're just antisocial within this family. But that said, going against the grain, those are the people who generally change the world. There's an expression for people like that, that they're going to change the world because the world sure isn't going to change them. And that's just part of some personalities. We might call it stubbornness, but there's a place for everybody in this world. We need the world changers. So I went against the grain too, and I still do, but it's not just to be contrarian. It's just sort of my nature. I don't like cliches. I don't want to be a cliche. I don't want to live like a cliche. And so people would say, in ways, I do go against the grain. I'm friendly about it. There's nothing mean about it, but it can be hard to get a read on me sometimes as well when you're in a relationship with me, let's say. But once you get to know me, you kind of get the lay of the land that I don't think normally. I don't necessarily do things normally. I like risk, but conservative, it's got to be thought out. And this all plays into how your father might have been perceiving you because you're rubbing him a certain way that he's not ready for, which leads into my next sort of larger point that touches on psychology and philosophy. Okay? You had outlined all these things that your father had done to you, beating you and all this stuff, and it was horrible. I'm going to go back to early childhood development and a certain theory that might put certain people in your life in perspective, including your father. Babies are born, and I'm not talking about you, I'm just saying in general. A baby is born and it cries because it's hungry. That's what we think. The theory is, oh, the baby could be 2 months old, could be a year old, is crying because it knows the mother has food, has a bottle or has a breast, and is going to feed the baby. And that's the answer to it, the solution to its problem. Well, here is a contrary theory about that. Infants don't yet have the linguistic capacity to form nouns. So in their brain, they're not thinking, oh, there's mom, or oh, there's a lady, and that thing there happens to be mom, comes to me when I cry and I get food. It doesn't have the word food in its head. It doesn't have the word mom in its head. So there is this idea that infants don't yet have this notion of being separate from the world around them. They don't see separate objects as separate objects. They sort of like amalgamate them all into, well, they don't amalgamate them. They've never seen them as separate. So when they're crying, the theory goes, we as adults say, oh, crying because it's hungry. The theory goes that they're crying because they don't understand on a certain level, on a rudimentary level, why this universe doesn't know just to make it not hungry. So it's a much more rudimentary approach. The reason I bring this part up is because then when the child becomes a toddler and then the toddler's 2-3 years old and learns, oh, this is a toy, that is a mother, my mother, that is a father, this is a table. They start to learn nouns, they start to learn language, they start to place things in space that are separate from them. So that's when, at a certain point, when they develop that ability and they realize, oh, different objects go different places, they develop the mine, 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 mine. And it's not because they're being selfish, it's because they're just sort of establishing or trying to figure out the lay of the land as far as what sort of will remain in their possession. And then you've got to teach them to share because they're part of a broader world. And then they start to develop social skills, which you'd like. My idea is that when you project into the future, some people don't divest themselves of the mine, me mentality. Like they know they have to get along with the world. Like, and we'll use your father as an example. I don't know if this applies. You just take this for what it's worth. It may have been the case that some people like the idea of having children way more than the responsibility of having children. And I know a lot of people actually like this, and it's very severe. But part of it is that if you don't divest yourself of that idea that like the world is out there, you're here, and you're kind of like the master of everything, and mine, that can make for a very angry person. And they may not even know they're going to have those kind of angry responses when they get married and have children, because some people kind of like the idea of having kids. It looks good to their parents, or it's always been in them to have children, but then the kid shows up. And my ex-wife and I used to own a dance school. She was a dancer. And in one conversation I had with the mother of a 3-year-old, she was telling me that while her daughter was in dance class and I was out at the desk doing my business stuff, because I was on the business side of things, but I was on the customer relations side of things. That's what I did in the studio while my ex-wife now was teaching. So I was talking with this one mom, and she said after she had her child, she was miserable. And it wasn't postpartum depression that she was alluding to or referring to. She said it took her months to accept that her life was no longer her own. But when she did, she said it instantly changed for her, and she loved being a parent. She loved being a mother to her child. But it wasn't until she made that decision that her life wasn't her own anymore. And whether your father, it's clear that in some ways he didn't make that switch to loving being a parent or accepting that his life wasn't his own anymore. So here you come along and you're posing these normal challenges because, each kid, parent opposites tend to attract that get together, and then the parents wonder, why is this kid so different? Well, because there's all sorts of things that this child is learning. They have different friends than the parents did when they were growing up, different influences. So of course they're going to develop a bit differently. But if you're going against the grain to push the envelope a bit, maybe a future world changer, and your father doesn't understand that, the combination of things might lend itself very well to just trying to beat you into submission to being what he thinks you should be, rather than accepting that you are your own person, and that getting you training in things, getting you education in things, like putting you in a good position to become what you could be, that's a challenge for parents, and some handle it very, very poorly. And I actually admire your survival instincts without knowing all the details, just based on what you wrote, that you ran away at age 13. In some ways, that took balls, because you knew that there would be ramifications. You didn't know where you'd go. You knew you couldn't make a living at age 13, but you just were like, I can't take this anymore. And that actually, kudos to you for having the balls to do that. Granted, it put you in the foster home. They came and got you, fair enough. That was good. But then things actually got worse, because I guess your father just couldn't handle a teenager at this point, and you just can't beat a kid into submission forever, because he's clearly not going to take it. So you got the Ford Mustang, which is, there are way worse cars to get than Ford Mustangs. Those are awesome. I had one, and they are awesome, and they are work, and they're a typical teenage vehicle. It sounds like your mom might have been okay with you having it, defending you, and your father just, for whatever reason, took exception to it. I know parents who are jealous of their own children's success. And that to me is so bizarre, but there's a competitiveness that also exists in some people. And they become parents, and that competitiveness might still be there. And as sick or weird as it may sound, they may be in competition with their kids. So here you come along with a Ford Mustang. Maybe your father never had a car at that age. Maybe he had an issue. I don't know what his deal was, but it sounded like there may have been an argument. I don't know. It could have been over anything. Maybe your mom might have been saying to your dad, back off. He needs a car. Kids get cars. This is what they do. I'm not quite sure. So there might have been other problems there that he was having with your mom too. But the violence and just trying to beat you into submission, obviously he went way too far, not just with that, but there's one thing between being selfish and being like an ungenerous person emotionally, financially, then going to the next step and saying, I'm going to beat you down. It sounds like your father was also somebody who went against the grain. It sounded like he insisted on having his way. based on your writing here, I don't know what details you left out and what the, his side of the story would be, so to speak, but it sounds like he went against the grain as well and wanted what he wanted, and there was a stubbornness. And here you come along and you're not towing the family line. You're not abiding by his every dictate. Uh, and, I'm sure you did things wrong as a kid too, which is normal. I did as well. I pushed the envelope too. I got in trouble. But to me, if people aren't getting in trouble, they're really not exploring life. You've got to get in trouble on some level because it means you're really living life. You got to make some messes in life to, in a sense, grow into who you are, find out where you fit in the world, what envelopes you can push, which ones are not healthy to push. So dial it back a little bit. But even given all that you have a successful career, that you've been to these countries, you've been to 48 states. I've only been to like 31 or 32. And, it's impressive that given that baggage that, there's horrible things. But here's the caveat to that. Here's an additional thing to think about. Sometimes when a parent is such a bad example, it makes it so obvious that you don't want to go in that direction. Because most kids want to be somewhat like their parents. At least they say that. I want to be like my father. I want to be like my mother. But sometimes there's a character trait in a parent that is so abhorrent to you that you go so far in the other direction, it's obvious. Sometimes parents, most people have some good, some bad going on with them, where even for a kid, you're like, okay, yeah, maybe my dad's overly critical of the neighbors or just kind of negative a bit, but he likes playing sports with me. So it can be a little confusing to know, all right, well, you like these things about your dad. He might like taking you sleigh riding when you're a kid and you have these good memories and some good feelings toward him, but he's critical. It may not be so obvious to you to not become a critical person. But to use that as an example, if your father is overly critical all the time, it makes it really easy to see after a while that negative sucks. I don't want to become like that. And you become a much more positive person because it's such a bad example in your face. It's possible that given all these bad things that happened, which of course you'd wish never happened, but take a look at yourself. It sounds like too that it was such a bad example that you went in the opposite direction. And being someone who goes against the grain naturally, it was probably relatively easy for you to go against the grain in that one, not be like your father, and have a good career and do all these other things. So, but like the seizures and all that I can't speak to because I don't have enough detail, and that's outside what I do. But I'm sure maybe seizures you've gotten checked. You've seen medical staff, medical professionals, doctors, and such to address that, and I hope so. And I hope those were not a product of what your father did. But I'll leave that between you and the appropriate people who know you better and have checked you, and doctors and all that stuff. Um, and you concluded, you said it toughened you up for sure, but didn't help you much in the long run of life. I think it helped you in some ways that I already mentioned. I'm going to guess that you had such a stark frame of reference that you would not repeat that behavior to anybody. And then the challenge becomes, all right, you're not your father. Got that part of it. Who am I? That's the next step to figure out, what do you believe in? Do you believe in kindness? Do you believe in generosity? Do you believe in giving to people who have need, for example, even if you don't know them, like all within limits? But do you hold doors for people? Just general common civilities that we do. Do you like, I'm going to embrace these people. They don't have to know about my demons, so to speak, or these horrible things in my life. I'm going to live out what I believe. And in part, that involves finding out kind of who you are, what do you believe in on the positive side of things, versus dwelling on, just saying, I don't believe in all these. I don't believe in beating people and making them run and all that stuff. Run, a half mile 20 times or whatever. So there you go. Leave it. You can, follow up on this stuff, folks. But if you want me to make a video, you can feel free to email me at rockinthecountry@gmail.com. I do life coaching. I'll probably put a trailer on these as far as how you can get in touch with me. But the Echelon Personal Coaching, that's me. That's my website. The information's in the description box below. And it's, we can do personal life coaching as well, like one-on-one via telephone. But in the meantime, I hope this helped. and I'm sorry that you went through it, but it sounds like you turned out to be a pretty good dude, and I hope your life is more peaceful. Okay, folks, that's it. Leave your comments if you want, and I'll hopefully see you on another life coaching video. Have a great day.